I've always been able to see exactly how much people despise me. It hovers over their heads like a digital readout, a raw metric of their secret resentment. 5 years of marriage, and tonight was the first time Victoria didn't come home. No answered calls, no return texts. It wasn't until the sky began to bruise with the pale light of dawn that the front door finally clicked open. I hurried to the foyer, my chest tight with worry. "Where were you?" She offered a soft, rehearsed explanation, her voice as gentle as it had always been. "Emergency at the office, sweetheart." I had to put my phone on silent. But my eyes were locked on the space just above her head. My heart bottomed out. Since our wedding day, her disdain meter had been a solid, reassuring 0. But in that exact second, the number flickered. It jumped to 5. Panic set in. I was about to ask if I'd done something wrong, if I'd somehow hurt or annoyed her, when her phone buzzed on the entryway console. An incoming text. Behind a playful cartoon avatar, the sender's contact name read, Brody. Victoria instinctively turned her shoulder, shielding the screen from my view. But as she looked down, the faint reflection of her smiling lips caught in the windowpane. And right above her, the harsh red numbers surged again. Disdain level, 50. A single text. A 45-point leap into pure contempt. I clutched the medical scan results in my palm, my fingers going numb. I didn't need to ask. I already knew the answer. Victoria turned back around. Seeing the color drain from my face, she stepped forward, wrapping her arms around me with a familiar, practiced tenderness. She tilted her chin up to press a soft kiss against my cheek. "Hey, stop worrying," she murmured. "Work has just been insane lately. I should have texted you beforehand. Next time I have to stay late, I promise I'll let you know." I didn't say a word. I was staring at her left hand. Her ring finger, where her wedding band usually sat, was bare. There was only a faint, pale indentation left in the skin. She noticed my gaze. Her hand instinctively curled into a tight fist, hiding the empty finger. "I took it off when I was washing my hands yesterday," she said, her voice smooth but slightly too fast. "I think it slipped down the drain. It was getting old anyway. We can go buy a new one whenever we have some free time." That ring. I had forged it myself when we got married. I had spent weeks in a local metal workshop, sweating over the forge, ending up with blistered, calloused hands. Back then, Victoria had cried when she saw it. She gently applied ointment to my burned skin, her voice thick with tears. "This is the most precious thing I've ever received. I'll never take it off. I'll never lose it." For 5 years, even during the winters when her fingers swelled slightly and the band pinched, she'd never taken it off. Not once. And now, she was telling me it was gone with the casual indifference of a misplaced set of keys. Victoria was a terrible liar, though she probably didn't realize it. Whenever she fabricated a story, she had a nervous habit of tightly pressing her lips together. I saw right through it. But I didn't call her out. I walked over to the kitchen, tossing the medical report into the trash can on the way. There was no point. Sensing that I wasn't going to press the issue, Victoria let out a quiet sigh of relief and headed into the master bathroom. As the hum of the shower started up, her phone buzzed again on the coffee table. The same cartoon avatar. As if possessed by someone else, I walked over. I punched in my birthday, the passcode we'd shared for years. The screen unlocked instantly. The boy was a new assistant in her department. Brody. 21 years old. They had only been connected on the app for less than a week, yet the thread was an endless scroll. There were more messages here than Victoria and I had exchanged in the last 5 years of our marriage. A hot, blurry haze filled my eyes. I tried to read the words, but my tears kept falling onto the glass, smudging the screen. One tear fell directly onto Brody's profile picture. I tapped it, and his social media feed opened up. And there, beneath the glare of the screen, was Victoria's lost wedding ring. In the photo, the boy held the silver band in his open palm, grinning boyishly at the camera. The caption read, "I casually mentioned how much I liked it, and Ms. Crawford literally took it off her finger and handed it to me, lol. If this isn't being spoiled, I don't know what is." My fingers began to shake violently. A sharp, suffocating ache bloomed in my chest, so intense it made my knees weak. I had to lean against the wall to keep from collapsing. I had prepared myself for a lot of scenarios. But I never imagined this was how she had lost her ring. I remembered the night I met Victoria. My father had kicked me out of the house, stripping me of everything. I was sitting on a cold curb, without enough change to buy a cheap cup of instant ramen. She had stopped in front of me, handing me a bag of groceries and a warm carton of milk while I sobbed so hard I could barely breathe. Victoria, with her endless capacity for sympathy back then, couldn't bear to leave me there. She took me back to her cramped, rented studio apartment. People always talk about the light that saves you from the dark, the savior trope. For years, Victoria was mine. She had literally pulled me out of the mud and built a home with me. Back then, I thought I was the luckiest man alive. Even if my own blood rejected me, I had found a woman who wanted to build a life with me. Who would have thought that before we even reached our 7-year itch, our marriage would disintegrate like this? "What do you think you're doing?" A sharp yell shattered my thoughts. Before I could even process the sound, Victoria lunged forward, ripping the phone out of my hands. She used so much force that I stumbled backward, my leg scraping hard against the sharp edge of the coffee table. A thin line of blood welled up instantly. When I looked up, the red numbers hovering above her head were blinding. Disdain level, 55. Jessie. It was the first time she had ever used that cold, sharp tone with me. Her face was twisted in a look of pure disgust. Snooping through my phone is incredibly toxic. There are boundaries, Jessie. Then her eyes flicked down to the scrape on my leg. Her tightly knit brows softened, just for a fraction of a second. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to push you. I really don't appreciate you invading my privacy. I swallowed the lump in my throat, my voice barely a whisper. We're married, Victoria. Her frown returned, deeper this time. Even married people need space, Jessie. We need to respect each other's boundaries. Without waiting for a response, she turned and walked into the home office. Before I could say another word, the heavy wooden door clicked shut. She locked it from the inside, shutting me out entirely. On the stove, the pot of sweet corn chowder, her favorite, was sizzling furiously. The bottom had scorched, filling the small kitchen with a bitter, burnt smell. I walked over and quietly turned off the burner. In the early days of our marriage, Victoria wasn't like this. She had climbed her way up to the executive suite through sheer grit, becoming one of the most respected directors in her industry, yet she had always been incredibly tender toward her ordinary, quiet husband. Our friends used to tease me, saying marrying her was the single greatest stroke of luck in my life. Maybe I had listened to those compliments for too long. Maybe I had been naive enough to believe she was different from everyone else. Now I knew. She wasn't different at all. I changed my clothes and went to work, keeping my head down. I didn't call her, and I didn't send a single text. Stepping back wasn't just a tactical retreat, it was a matter of basic dignity. I knew when I wasn't wanted. Maybe she felt a twinge of guilt, or maybe it was just a passing whim. Late that afternoon, a text from Victoria popped up on my screen. Hey babe, let's not fight. I booked a table at that new Italian place downtown to make it up to you. Part of me wanted to refuse, but I knew we needed to talk. We couldn't keep living in this suffocating silence. I agreed to meet her. When I arrived at the restaurant, I spotted her immediately through the floor-to-ceiling windows. She had an effortless, regal elegance that didn't rely on designer labels. Even in a simple white linen dress with no jewelry, she commanded the room. But then my gaze shifted to the young man sitting next to her, and my throat tightened. He was holding a boba tea, taking a happy sip before smiling and pressing the straw directly to Victoria's lips. Victoria laughed, leaning in to take a sip herself. The same cup. The same straw. There was no hesitation. The movement was so fluid, so casual, like a pair of college sweethearts in the middle of a honeymoon phase. Victoria had always been a germaphobe. She never shared food or drinks with anyone. Even if I offered her a bite of my food, she would politely but firmly decline. Yet here she was, drinking after another man without a second thought, her eyes sparkling with laughter. I stood outside the glass doors, my teeth clenched so tightly I could taste copper on my tongue. Even before I saw his face clearly, I knew. It was Brody. As if sensing my presence, Victoria looked up. Our eyes locked through the glass. The laughter vanished from her face instantly, replaced by a sudden, fleeting look of guilt. She stood up and hurried to the entrance, pulling me toward the table. This is Brody, the new associate in my department, she said quickly. He didn't have any dinner plans, so I told him he should tag along. The more the merrier, right? With that single, breezy sentence, she effectively choked out any questions I might have asked. I forced my lips into a polite line, trying to keep my composure. A three-person marriage is certainly crowded, but it is anything but merry. Like the small round table before us, it was built for two. A third person meant someone was always squeezed out. Brody leaned back in his chair, offering a lazy, confident smile. You must be Jessie. Wow, you look a lot older than Victoria. Sorry for crashing your date night, man. I promise I'll try not to be too much of a third wheel. The mockery in his eyes was naked, a childish but deliberate provocation. The urge to turn around and walk out was overwhelming, but Victoria caught my arm, forcing me down into the chair beside her. Come on, sit down. Brody's just teasing you. He's young, Jessie. Don't be so sensitive. Let it go. She smiled warmly, but above her head, the vivid red numbers flared. Disdain level, 65. I hadn't said a single word, yet my mere presence had cost me another 5 points of her respect. The waiter approached, placing a menu in front of Victoria. Ma'am, the couple's tasting menu you ordered last time is off the menu today, but you and your boyfriend can look at our new seasonal selections. He handed the second menu to Brody. Brody didn't bother correcting him. He just pointed at the page. Sure, let's do the new couple's menu. It looks great. Only after the waiter walked away did Brody look at me with a performative gasp of realization. Oh, shoot. I'm so sorry, Jessie. I totally forgot you were here. But don't worry, the portions are huge. Honestly, I have a tiny appetite. Last time, Victoria had to finish half of my plate anyway. We can just share. Victoria tapped Brody's forehead with a playful, reprimanding finger. Stop misbehaving, she chided softly. You can't offer Jessie your leftovers. It was a scolding in theory, but her tone was soaked in affection. There was no real bite to it. Jessie, she said, pushing her menu toward me. See if there's anything else you want to add. I didn't take it. I just shook my head. No, thanks. I'm not hungry. Victoria opened her mouth to argue, but Brody beat her to it. I don't blame you, Jessie. Honestly, if I showed up to a place like this wearing rack discount clothes, I'd probably lose my appetite too. Oh, by the way, when I closed that big account last week, Victoria bought me a couple of designer suits. I have way too many now. You should come over and pick one out. Before I could find my voice, Victoria leaned over and draped a soft cashmere wrap over Brody's lap. Don't worry about it. What's bought for you is yours. Besides, those cuts wouldn't really suit Jessie anyway. He doesn't really have the frame for it. He's different from you guys. My hands balled into fists under the table, the nails biting deep into my palms. Different. Of course I was different. I was 30 years old. And Brody was barely 21, in the absolute flush of his youth. The warm amber light from the chandelier washed over Victoria's face. She looked so perfectly casual, completely oblivious to the casual cruelty of her words. While I sat there frozen, the food arrived. 2 beautifully plated steaks. One was placed in front of Victoria. The other went to Brody. I couldn't breathe. I stood up, turned on my heel, and walked out. Just as the glass door swung shut behind me, I caught a final glimpse of her through the window. She hadn't stood up to follow me. Above her head, the numbers shifted. Disdain level, 70. Victoria didn't come home until long after midnight. The moment she stepped through the door, her phone rang. It was a custom ringtone, the one she had recently assigned specifically to Brody. She answered it almost instantly. Brody? What's wrong? Through the receiver, his voice sounded fragile, trembling with a quiet sob. Victoria, there's someone walking around outside my apartment building. I'm really scared. Victoria's face went entirely pale. Stay inside, she said, her voice tight with panic. Lock your doors. I'm coming right now. She kicked her shoes back on and grabbed her keys. As she turned toward the door, I finally spoke. Victoria. She stopped. Her back was to me, her shoulders stiff. Just because I don't say anything doesn't mean I'm blind, I said quietly. Please don't treat me like an idiot. For a long moment, she didn't move. She stood perfectly still in the entryway. But she didn't explain. She didn't look back. She opened the door and hurried out into the night. Before the door clicked shut, the red numbers above her head flashed one last time. Disdain level, 75. The door slammed shut. The apartment fell back into a heavy, suffocating silence. She had left in such a rush that she hadn't even taken her coat. Another night alone. I didn't call her, and I didn't text. The next morning, I took a cab to a lawyer friend's office. I asked him to draft a divorce agreement. My friend stared at me, trying to talk me out of it. Jessie, are you sure? Women like Victoria, successful, brilliant, don't come around often. You should be fighting to pull her back, not just handing her over to some kid. Ending a 5-year marriage like this. It's a waste. I took a slow sip of my black coffee, letting the bitter taste settle on my tongue. I didn't offer an explanation. Walking away was painful, yes. But holding on to something that was already dead was worse. Our marriage had cracked open, and once the foundation of trust was gone, the rest of the house was bound to collapse anyway. There was nothing left to salvage. Sometimes, letting go is the only way to save yourself. A few hours after the papers were drafted, my phone rang. It was Brody. Let's meet up, he said, his voice dripping with smug satisfaction. I have some things I think you'd love to see. He was young and reckless, clearly riding high on the victory of the night before, eager to rub my face in it. I didn't back down. I agreed to meet him at a quiet park nearby. The moment I arrived, Brody pulled out his phone and thrust the screen in front of my face. It was a photo of the two of them. They were in his bed, tangled in the sheets, pressed close. Victoria was looking at him with a look of soft, dizzying adoration I hadn't seen on her face in years. Victoria spent the whole night in my bed, Brody sneered, his eyes narrowed with triumph. She promised me she'd give me everything I ever wanted. To her, you're just a glorified housekeeper who cooks her meals and does her laundry. I'm the one who actually belongs by her side. I stared at the screen. A dull, heavy ache settled in my chest, but I forced my expression to remain entirely flat. Good for you, I said, my voice steady despite the tightness in my throat. I hope you two are very happy. Brody's smile faltered, irritated by my lack of reaction. He grabbed my wrist, his grip surprisingly tight. Oh, come on, Jessie. A simple blessing isn't enough. Before I could pull away, his face twisted into a performance of sheer terror. He grabbed my hand and yanked it toward his own cheek, striking himself hard. Ah! Victoria, help! Before I could comprehend what was happening, a violent force shoved me from behind. I stumbled backward, my head colliding hard with the stone base of a nearby statue. A sharp, blinding pain exploded at the back of my skull. Through the high-pitched ringing in my ears, Victoria's furious voice cut through the air. Jesse! If you have a problem with me, take it out on me. Don't you dare touch Brody. Warm blood began to trickle down my neck, dripping onto the concrete. I forced the words past my lips. Victoria, call an ambulance. Even though I wanted a divorce, I didn't want to die. I wanted to live my life. But Victoria's attention was entirely consumed by Brody. Victoria, I was just trying to apologize to him. Brody whined, clutching his cheek. It hurts so bad. Do you think it'll scar? Victoria held him close, her voice thick with worry. Shoo, it's okay. I'm taking you home right now to get some ice. It'll be fine. She didn't look back at me. Not once. She helped Brody to his feet and hurried him toward her car. In my fading consciousness, I saw the crimson numbers above her head spike to their absolute limit. Disdain level, 98. I let out a bitter, silent laugh. Summoning the absolute last of my strength, I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. An hour later, after Victoria had dropped Brody off at his apartment, her phone rang. It was the hospital. Is this Victoria Crawford? Your husband, Jesse Crawford, was admitted with severe head trauma resulting in an intracranial hemorrhage. He is currently in emergency surgery. We need you here immediately to sign the consent forms. Her breath caught. The world seemed to stop spinning. Intracranial hemorrhage. When reality crashed back in, she ran out of the building, driving like a maniac toward the hospital. At that exact moment, the bright red numbers above her head plummeted for the first time in months. Disdain level, 20. The fluorescent lights of St. Jude's emergency wing didn't flicker, they hummed. With a low, hydraulic drone that seemed to vibrate inside Victoria's teeth. She stood at the triage desk, her heels coated in a thin sheen of mud from the park, her coat forgotten on the passenger seat of her Lexus. The air smelled of burnt coffee, industrial disinfectant, and cold sweat. Jesse Crawford, she repeated, her voice cracking against the glass partition. He was brought in by ambulance. Head trauma. The nurse behind the counter didn't look up immediately. She typed with deliberate, maddening slowness, her fingernails clicking against the keyboard. Like tiny, hollow bone fragments. Relation? I'm his wife. The nurse stopped typing. She looked up, her gaze sliding over Victoria's disheveled hair, the red smudge of mud on her knee, and the raw panic written across her face. Above the nurse's surgical cap, a faint, amber number flickered into existence in Victoria's peripheral vision, 12. A baseline, every day. Irritation reserved for frantic relatives. Surgeons in or for, the nurse said, pushing a clipboard across the counter. Intracranial bleed. They had to drill a burr hole to relieve the pressure. Before he herniated. You need to sign the consent forms for the craniotomy. Victoria's hand shook so violently she could barely hold the pen. Her signature. Usually an authoritative, razor-sharp scrawl that authorized millions in corporate acquisitions, looked like the frantic scratching of a dying bird. Is he going to wake up? She whispered. Talk to Dr. Vance when he comes out, the nurse said coldly, snatching the clipboard back. Victoria turned around and walked into the waiting room. The vinyl chairs were cracked, spilling yellow foam like open wounds. She sat down, her hands pressed tightly between her knees to stop the tremor. Above her own reflection in the darkened window across the room, the invisible metric hovered. Disdain level, 18. It was dropping. The lower it went, the more the cold, sickening reality washed over her. For months, no, for the last year, she had watched that metric rise. Whenever she looked at Jesse, she had convinced herself he was dragging her down. He was quiet. He was ordinary. He was a man who spent his afternoons quietly fixing creaking cabinet doors and stirring pots of sweet corn chowder, while she negotiated venture capital rounds with city titans. He was safe. And because he was safe, he had become boring. Because he was boring, he had become easy to despise. Then Brody had appeared. Brody, with his sharp jawline, his reckless laughs, his constant, needy adoration that made her feel like a young god rather than a tired executive pushing 35. With Brody, everything was electric. Brody didn't ask her about her day, he demanded her attention. He was a fire she thought she was controlling. She looked at her hands. Her left ring finger felt light. Naked. I took it off when I was washing my hands yesterday. I think it slipped down the drain. The lie tasted like ash in her mouth. She had given it to Brody because Brody had pouted, wrapping his arms around her waist in her private office, whispering How he wanted a piece of her that no one else could touch. She had laughed. Slipped the silver band off her finger, the band Jesse had spent 3 weeks hammering in a foundry, his hands covered in blood blisters, and dropped it into Brody's palm like a piece of cheap candy. The double doors at the end of the hall swung open. A tall man in blue scrubs walked out, pulling down his mask. His forehead was lined with sweat, his eyes heavy with exhaustion. Victoria sprang to her feet. Dr. Vance? The surgeon stopped, looking at her. Mrs. Crawford? How is he? Please, tell me. Dr. Vance sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. We stopped the arterial bleed and evacuated the hematoma. The pressure on his temporal lobe has been relieved. Structurally, he survived the immediate threat. Victoria let out a ragged breath, her knees buckling slightly. Oh, thank God. Don't thank anyone yet, Dr. Vance interrupted, his voice dropping into a flat, grim register. The impact caused a severe brain contusion. But more concerning, Mrs. Crawford, is what we found on his pre-op CT scan. Victoria froze. What do you mean? The impact didn't cause the primary shadow on his brain, Dr. Vance said, pulling a tablet from his pocket and tapping the screen. He turned it toward her. Your husband has an advanced, deep-seated acoustic neuroma pressed against his brainstem. It's been growing for at least 2 years. It's the size of a walnut. The room seemed to tilt. The hum of the lights grew deafening. A tumor? Victoria breathed. Yes. Did he never mention the symptoms? Severe headaches? Tinnitus? Episodes of sudden vertigo? Vision changes? He must have been in excruciating pain for months. Victoria stood paralyzed. The trash can. She remembered yesterday morning. Jesse walking to the kitchen, tossing a white envelope into the trash can before she left for work. She hadn't even looked at it. She had been too busy hiding her phone, too busy smelling like Brody's cheap cologne, too busy lecturing Jesse about boundaries and toxicity while he stood there in silence, his face pale as paper. He hadn't been sulking. He had been dying. He didn't tell me, she whispered, her voice barely a squeak. Dr. Vance stared at her, his eyes cold, unblinking. Above his head, a red metric flickered into existence, burning bright and sharp against the clinical white wall. Disdain level, 85. He didn't tell you? Dr. Vance said softly. Mrs. Crawford, his medical file shows he was diagnosed 3 weeks ago at a clinic downtown. The doctor's notes say he refused immediate surgery because he didn't want to burden his family during a stressful career transition. The surgeon turned on his heel. He's in recovery room 3. He's still unconscious. You can go in, but don't stay long. The master bedroom was silent when Victoria returned at dawn to grab clean clothes for Jesse. The apartment smelled faintly of burnt corn. The pot was still sitting on the stove, cold and black at the bottom. Jesse had turned off the burner before she locked him out, preserving the small apartment from burning down while she ran into the night to comfort a boy who had claimed he was scared of shadows. Victoria walked into the kitchen with mechanical, heavy steps. She knelt beside the small trash can under the sink. Her trembling hands dug through the discarded coffee grounds, the paper towels, and the junk mail until her fingers brushed against smooth, heavy paper. She pulled out the crumpled medical report. Patient, Jesse Crawford. Diagnosis, intracranial acoustic neuroma, stage 3. Recommended treatment, immediate surgical resection/radiotherapy. Note. Patient declined scheduling. Stated personal reasons. Beneath the medical report in the trash lay another document. A blue folder. Crisp and unbent, folded neatly at the bottom. Victoria pulled it out. Settlement agreement and dissolution of marriage. Her name was typed at the top. Jesse had already signed his portion on the back page. His signature was clean, precise, unhurried. Dated yesterday morning. Before the park. Before Brody. Before she shoved him. He hadn't fought her. He hadn't screamed. He hadn't begged. He had simply prepared his exit, quietly organizing his own death and his own departure so he wouldn't disrupt her life. A sob tore from Victoria's throat, sharp and jagged. She collapsed onto the cold kitchen tile, clutching the blue folder to her chest. Disdain level, 0. The metric above her reflection in the microwave door sat at 0. But it wasn't a good 0. It wasn't the warm, peaceful 0 of their wedding day. It was the 0 of absolute exhaustion. The 0 of a man who had looked at her, measured her contempt, and realized there was nothing left to fight for. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out blindly. Brody's name lit up the screen, accompanied by his goofy, cartoon avatar. Brody, hey babe, my cheek is still kinda red. Are you coming over today? I bought those bagels you like. Also, that creepy husband of yours better not come near my place again or I'm calling the cops. Victoria stared at the text. For months, she had read Brody's texts with a secret, thrilling flutter in her chest. Now, looking at those words, a wave of revulsion so violent washed over her that she gagged, throwing the phone onto the counter as if it were a venomous spider. She picked up her purse, grabbed the blue folder, and drove back to the hospital. Jesse woke up to the smell of ozone and wet pavement. The world was hazy, filtered through a heavy, golden smog. His head throbbed with a rhythmic, dull ache at the base of his skull, but the sharp, stabbing pressure behind his right eye, the pressure that had plagued him for months, was strangely gone. He blinked. The ceiling tiles were white, dotted with tiny black holes. Jesse? A voice, soft and trembling, came from his right. He turned his head slowly. Victoria sat in a chair beside the bed. Her eyes were bloodshot, her hair unwashed, her pristine white linen dress rumpled and stained with coffee. She looked smaller than he had ever seen her. Above her head, the digital readout hovered. It was gone. No red numbers. No green numbers. Nothing. Just empty air. Jesse stared at the blank space above her brow for a long moment. He tried to summon the old panic, the old desperation that used to grip him whenever the numbers fluctuated. He tried to feel the suffocating ache that had crushed his ribs in the park when she turned her back on him. There was nothing. His chest felt vast, hollow, and entirely silent. You're awake, Victoria breathed, reaching out her hand to touch his arm. Oh. Jesse, thank God. The doctor said. Jesse pulled his arm back. It wasn't a sudden, violent movement, it was a slow, calm withdrawal, pulling his arm beneath the thin hospital sheet. Victoria's hand hovered in the air, frozen. Her lips trembled. Jesse, I know, she whispered, tears spilling over her eyelashes. I found the scan. I found the paper in the trash. Did you sign it? Jesse's voice was raspy, dry like autumn leaves, but entirely steady. Victoria flinched as if he had struck her. Sign it? No. Jesse, no. We can fix this. The doctor said they removed the tumor pressure, but you need rehab, you need rest. I took a leave of absence from the company this morning. I'm taking care of you. You don't need to do that, Jesse said quietly. He turned his head to look out the window. Rain was streaking down the glass in long, dirty gray lines. Mark has the original copies. You just need to sign the last page and give him your attorney's contact. I don't want a divorce, she cried, grabbing the edge of the mattress. Jesse. Please. Look at me. He didn't look at her. He didn't need to. Victoria, he said, his tone as even as a flatline. When I was 20, my father looked at me and told me I was useless because I didn't want to run his firm. He gave me 2 hours to pack my bags. I spent 3 days on the street before I met you. Victoria sobbed, covering her face with her hands. I remember. Jesse. I spent 5 years trying to prove to you that I was worth keeping, Jesse continued softly. Every time your meter went up, 10, 20, 50, I thought it was my fault. I thought if I cooked better, if I stayed quiet, if I didn't embarrass you in front of your friends, the number would go back to 0. He turned his face back to her then. His eyes were clear, dark, and utterly vacant of affection. I realized yesterday in the park. The number didn't go up because I was failing. It went up because you hated that I was the one who saw you when you had nothing. You hated that I reminded you of who you were before you became successful. That's not true. Victoria wept. I love you. I was foolish, I was vain, I was poisoned by him, but I love you. You don't, Jesse said gently. You just don't like losing things that belong to you. Like your wedding ring. Victoria gasped, reaching instinctively for her naked left hand. The ring, Jesse said, a tiny, faint smile touching the corner of his pale lips, a smile colder than the rain outside. I burned my hands making it. I thought it was a promise. But you gave it away like a piece of plastic. I'll get it back, she screamed, desperate, standing up so fast her chair clattered backward against the floor. I'll get it back right now. Jesse, stay here. Don't move. I'll bring it back to you. Jesse didn't answer. He closed his eyes, drifting back into the soft, silent darkness of his anesthesia. The rain was coming down in sheets when Victoria's Lexus pulled up to the curb outside Brody's apartment complex. She didn't use the elevator. She took the stairs 3 at a time, her wet heels slapping violently against the concrete steps. Her heart pounded in her throat. A frantic, ragged rhythm. I'll get it back. If I get it back, he'll see. He'll see I'm sorry. She pounded on Brody's door. A moment later, the door swung open. Brody stood there, wearing a silk robe she had bought him last month, holding an ice pack against his cheek. He grinned when he saw her. Babe. You took so long. Did you bring? Victoria didn't wait. She shoved past him into the living room, her eyes darting across the cluttered space. Hey. What's wrong with you? Brody snapped, shutting the door. I told you, my cheek is swollen. That crazy husband of yours. Shut up, Victoria said. Brody blinked, caught off guard. What? Where is it? She turned on him, her eyes dark, her posture rigid. Where is the ring? Brody sneered, tossing the ice pack onto the couch. Oh, that old piece of junk. I don't know, maybe in the drawer. Why are you acting like this? Victoria, he attacked me yesterday. You saw it. He hit me. Victoria stepped forward. In that moment, she wasn't the gentle, indulgent woman who laughed at his jokes and let him sip her drinks. She was Victoria Crawford, chief executive, the woman who had liquidated 3 competitor firms before her 30th birthday. I called the park security office 3 hours ago, she said, her voice dropping into a deadly whisper. They have high-definition CCTV covering the Statue Plaza. Brody's face went pale. The arrogant smirk faltered. I watched the footage, Brody, she continued, taking another step toward him. I watched you grab his wrist. I watched you slap yourself across the face. And I watched you shove a sick, dying man backward into a stone pedestal. Victoria, wait, listen to me. Brody stuttered, taking a step back until his lower back hit his desk. He was talking shit about you. He was telling me I was just a side piece. I got mad. Give me the ring, she demanded, extending her hand. It's just a cheap piece of silver. Brody yelled, his posture turning defensive, petty, juvenile. You told me yourself it was worthless. You said he made it in some dirty garage. Slap. The sound cracked through the apartment like a gunshot. Brody reeled back, clutching his left cheek, the side that hadn't been marked before. Blood trickled from his lip. Where is it? Victoria asked, her voice dangerously quiet. Brody stumbled back, trembling now, his bravado entirely crushed. He opened the top drawer of his desk, fished through a pile of loose receipts, and pulled out the silver band. It was smudged, dull, sitting carelessly beside a pair of cheap sunglasses. Victoria snatched it from his palm. She gripped the metal tightly, feeling the rough, handmade ridges Jesse had forged with his own blistered hands 5 years ago. You're fired, she said, looking down at him with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. Pack your things. My head of HR will be at your desk by 8 tomorrow morning with a severance agreement and a non-disclosure order. If you step within 100 yards of my office or my husband again, I will sue you for corporate espionage, assault, and fraud until you are broke for the rest of your natural life. You can't do that. Brody screamed, his voice cracking like a terrified child's. You gave me those suits. You bought me that watch. I'll tell the board. I'll post the pictures. Victoria stopped at the front door. She didn't even turn around. Post them, she said coldly. See who the board believes, the CEO who built the company, or the 21-year-old assistant facing criminal assault charges. She slammed the door shut behind her. When Victoria returned to the hospital, room 3 was empty. The bed was stripped down to the blue mattress. The heart monitor was turned off, its screen dark. The 4 poles stood in the corner like an abandoned skeleton. Panic spiked in her chest. She grabbed a passing nurse by the arm. Where is he? Where is Jesse Crawford? The patient in 3? The nurse checked her tablet. He checked himself out an hour ago. Checked himself out? Victoria shouted. He had brain surgery yesterday. He can barely walk. A gentleman picked him up, the nurse said calmly. A lawyer, I think. Mr. Crawford signed an against medical advice release form. He said he had personal affairs to settle. Victoria ran out of the hospital, her heels splashing through the rain-soaked parking lot. She drove straight to their apartment. The front door was unlocked. She burst inside. Jesse. Silence greeted her. The apartment was spotlessly clean. The scorched pot had been scrubbed clean and placed neatly in the drying rack. The trash can was empty. She ran to the master bedroom. His closet door was open. Half the clothes were gone, only his cheap, durable flannel shirts, his work boots, and his old jeans. The designer suits she had forced him to wear to company galas were still hanging there, unworn, pristine, aligned by color. On the nightstand sat a single white envelope. Inside was a key, a checkbook, and a short, handwritten note. Victoria. I took my tools and my clothes. The account contains half of what was in our joint savings, only the portion I earned from my metalwork commissions over the last 5 years. I didn't touch your money. The divorce papers are with Mark. Sign them when you are ready. You don't need to come looking for me. The lease on my old workshop in the industrial district expires next month. I will be gone before then. Thank you for taking me in 7 years ago. You gave me a home when I had none. I think we are even now. Goodbye. Jessie. Victoria fell to her knees beside the bed, clutching the letter to her chest. She opened her palm. The silver ring sat in her hand, cold, rain-streaked, and heavy. For 5 years, she had thought she was the savior. She had thought she was the sun around which his quiet, ordinary life revolved. She had believed his devotion was an infinite, unyielding natural law, something that would always be there waiting for her, no matter how far she strayed, no matter how cruelly she treated him. She hadn't saved him. He had chosen her. And now, he had unchosen her. She lifted her eyes to the full-length mirror across the room. Above her own head, floating in the dark, empty bedroom, the red numbers flared to life, burning brighter and larger than anything she had ever seen above Jessie's head. Disdain level, 100. She wasn't looking at Jessie's hatred. She was looking at her own. 6 months later. The Metropolitan Center for Fine Arts was packed with the city's elite. Crystal chandeliers cast warm, glittering light over velvet-draped displays, champagne flutes clinked, and soft jazz echoed off the marble floors. Victoria stood near the grand staircase, wearing a tailored black silk gown. Her hair was pulled back into an icy, flawless chignon. She looked composed, powerful, and utterly lifeless. In 6 months, she had restructured her executive team, expanded her company's holdings by 20%, and completely erased Brody from her professional life. Her colleagues praised her sharpness, her focus, her ruthless efficiency. None of them knew that she spent her nights sitting in a silent, dark apartment, staring at an empty spot on the dining table where a bowl of sweet corn chowder used to sit. Victoria, a loud, booming voice called out. She turned to see Arthur Vance, the billionaire founder of Vance Global Heavy Industries, one of the largest manufacturing conglomerates on the East Coast. Arthur, Victoria said, forcing a polite, polished smile. I didn't expect to see you at an art exhibition. Normally, I'd rather eat dirt, the old man chuckled, taking a glass of champagne from a passing waiter's tray. But tonight is special. The museum is unveiling the new forge collection from the mystery artisan everyone's been talking about. The guy who refused to sign with a gallery. An artisan? Victoria asked mildly. Yeah. Metalwork. Kinetic sculptures, hand-forged steel, silver inlay. Magnificent stuff. They say he worked out of a broken-down garage in the industrial district for years before a scout found him. Arthur's face darkened. Slightly, a shadow of bitter pride creeping into his eyes. Reminds me of my youngest son. Foolish boy left home 7 years ago because he didn't want my money. Thought he could build a life on his own terms. Victoria's heart gave a sudden, violent thud. Your son. Jessie, Arthur spat, though there was an unmistakable thread of regret in his voice. Haven't seen him in years. Stubborn bastard. He'd rather starve than ask me for a dime. Victoria froze. Her breath caught in her throat. Jessie Vance. She remembered the day she met him on the curb. His shoes had been thin, his coat torn, his eyes filled with quiet dignity even as he starved. He had told her his father had kicked him out. She had assumed he was from some broken, impoverished family in the Rust Belt. She had never asked for his family name. He had simply taken hers when they married, Crawford. He wasn't an ordinary, desperate street kid she had saved. He was the heir to Vance Global, a man who had abandoned billions because he wanted a life built on pure, uncorrupted love. And she had offered him a life of calculated contempt. Ladies and gentlemen. The museum director's voice resonated through the speakers, cutting through Victoria's rising panic. Tonight, we are honored to present the debut exhibition of our featured artist. A man whose work combines the raw power of the forge with the delicate intimacy of human emotion. Please welcome Jessie Vance. The heavy velvet curtain at the back of the gallery pulled back. A storm of applause erupted through the hall. Jessie stood beneath the warm spotlight. He wore a dark, tailored charcoal suit, not the cheap off-the-rack outfits she used to mock, nor the suffocating designer suits she had tried to force on him. But a bespoke creation that fit his tall, broad frame perfectly. His hair was trimmed neatly, hiding the faint scar along his right temple where the surgery had been performed. He looked healthy. He looked whole. He looked striking. Beside him stood a young woman with warm brown eyes, wearing a simple navy dress, holding a glass of water for him. She wasn't an executive. She wasn't dressed in labels. She was smiling at him with quiet, unpretentious admiration, her hand resting gently on his sleeve. Victoria felt as though the floor had dissolved beneath her feet. She pushed through the crowd, ignoring the glares of diplomats and socialites, stumbling forward until she reached the edge of the exhibition platform. Jesse was talking to a museum curator, his voice calm, confident, and deep. "Jesse." She choked out. Jesse stopped. He turned his head slowly, his dark eyes falling upon her. The crowd around them seemed to blur into soft, irrelevant background noise. Victoria stared up at him. She looked above his head, her eyes wide, searching frantically for the metric that had governed her life for 5 years. There was no readout. No red digits. No numbers. No metric hovering in the air. His vision was gone. Or perhaps, the sight had vanished the moment he stopped caring enough to measure anyone's heart. Jesse looked at her. His face was entirely serene. There was no anger in his gaze, no resentment, no lingering pain. He looked at her the same way he looked at the marble columns of the museum, a piece of history, frozen, distant, and completely inanimate. "Hello, Victoria," he said softly. "Jesse." "Please," she whispered, her hands clutching her purse so tightly her knuckles turned white. "Can we talk? Just 5 minutes. Please." The young woman beside Jesse looked between them, sensing the tension, and quietly stepped back to give them space. Jesse nodded once to his companion, then stepped off the platform, gesturing toward the quiet balcony overlooking the moonlit river outside. The night air on the balcony was crisp, smelling of wet asphalt and pine. Victoria stood near the stone balustrade, her shoulders shaking against the chill. Jesse stood 3 feet away, his hands loosely clasped behind his back, looking out over the dark water. "I didn't know," Victoria started, her voice breaking. "Arthur, your father is inside. He told me who you are." "It doesn't matter who I was," Jesse said quietly. "It only matters who I am. You could have had everything," she wept, stepping closer. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because if I told you, I would never have known if you stayed because of who I was, or what I had," Jesse replied, turning his gaze to her. "And as it turns out, even when I had nothing, you couldn't stay." Victoria reached into her purse with trembling fingers. She pulled out a small velvet box and opened it. Inside lay the silver ring. She had taken it to a jeweler, had it polished, buffed, and smoothed until it shone like new. "I got it back," she said, holding it out to him like a sacred offering. "I fired Brody. I destroyed his reputation. I haven't looked at another person since you left. Jesse. I brought your ring back. Please, come home." Jesse looked down at the velvet box. He didn't reach for it. He didn't flinch. Slowly, gently, he reached out his hand and closed the velvet lid, pushing her hand softly back toward her. "That ring was for a woman who loved a man sitting on a curb in the rain," Jesse said, his voice as soft as a breeze through dry autumn leaves. "That woman doesn't exist anymore. And that man died 6 months ago on an operating table. I do love you." Victoria screamed, the icy veneer of her corporate composure shattering entirely. Tears rained down her face, ruining her makeup, dripping onto her black silk gown. "I love you, Jesse. I was blind. I was cruel. I will spend the rest of my life making it up to you. I'll sell the company. I'll leave the city. Anything you want." Jesse looked at her. For the first time, a flicker of sad, gentle pity crossed his features. "Victoria," he said quietly. "Do you know what I saw above your head the night you came home late?" She froze, her sobbing catching in her throat. "I saw a 5, Jesse murmured. "And then I saw a 50. And by the time you pushed me in the park, it was 98. Victoria hid her face in her hands, her shoulders racked with violent sobs. "For 5 years, I thought that number was my sentence," Jesse continued, turning back toward the river. "I thought if I worked harder, I could keep it low. But the night I woke up in the hospital, I realized something wonderful." He looked back at her, his eyes shining in the moonlight with a profound, unshakable peace. "The numbers weren't telling me how much you hated me," he said. "They were Telling me how much of my life I was wasting on someone who couldn't see my worth. He took a step back toward the warm light of the gallery doors. I don't see the numbers anymore, Victoria, Jesse said softly. Because I don't need a metric to tell me I am free. He turned and walked back inside. The heavy glass door clicked shut behind him, sealing him inside the bright, warm room filled with art, laughter, and appreciation. Victoria stood alone on the freezing balcony. She lifted her trembling hands to her face, her chest heaving with silent, agonizing gasps for air. She looked up into the dark sky, then down at the glass reflection in the balcony window. Hovering above her head, brilliant, permanent, and blindingly red against the night, the numbers burned into her vision, a metric she would carry for the rest of her long, cold life. Disdain level, 100. Not from him. From herself. Inside the gallery, Jessie walked back to the young woman who was waiting for him. She smiled, offering him a warm cup of tea. He took it, his hand steady, his smile real, and together they walked into the crowd, leaving the shadows behind forever.